Have him removed from this building. Now. That was the order Vittoria Lang gave the morning after I saw her secret, but somewhere between that sentence and the elevator doors closing, everything changed. What she did instead would put my name, my daughter's future, and her entire empire on the line. But to understand why a woman that powerful would risk it all on a man who mops floors for a living, you have to see the night before. The night nobody was ever supposed to know about. My name is Spencer Reed. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. If I worked hard enough and loved my daughter with everything I had, we would be okay. Even if the world never once looked twice at a man like me. I still believe that, mostly. But there was a Tuesday night in Buckhead when I opened a door I shouldn't have and saw something that wasn't mine to see. Before I tell you what was behind it, let me take you back to that morning, because it started like every other one. 5:40 a.m., a two-bedroom apartment off Flat Shoals Avenue in East Atlanta. The coffee maker groans before it brews. I make Mia's lunch in the dark so the kitchen light won't wake her. Peanut butter, no jelly, because jelly makes the bread sad, according to a 7-year-old who has strong opinions about sandwiches. I check her inhaler is in the front pocket of her backpack. Every morning, twice. I still remember the night 3 years ago when she was 4, wheezing so hard in the ER that I couldn't get my hands to stop shaking long enough to fill out the intake forms. I promised her, standing in that hallway, that I'd never let her feel that scared again. I checked that inhaler pocket because of that promise, not out of habit. Our minivan is 11 years old and makes a sound like a dying accordion when it starts. Mia calls it the old dragon. I call it a miracle it still runs. Miss Betty next door waters her tomatoes at 6 sharp and waves at me like clockwork. And some mornings, that wave is the only thing that reminds me I'm still a person and not just a schedule. I clean office buildings at night. 2 jobs, actually. Days, I do handyman work when I can get it. Nights, I run a floor crew at a high-rise in Buckhead. Rich part of town. Different world. Last month at Mia's school fundraiser, a mother in a coat that probably cost more than my rent looked at my work boots, then at me, and asked, not unkindly, just carelessly, if I was with the custodial staff setting up chairs. I said, no, ma'am. I'm a parent. My daughter's in Miss Alvarez's class. She smiled the smile people give you when they've already decided who you are. I smiled back. I've gotten good at that smile. It doesn't cost me anything to wear it. It's what's underneath that they never bothered to ask about. Here's the thing nobody in that gymnasium knew. I have $2,140 saved in a jar of a bank account for Mia's asthma specialist. And I haven't missed a payment on anything in 4 years. Not once. Not even the month the transmission went. People look at my hands and think they know my whole story. They don't. That Tuesday night, I clocked in at 10. 11th floor, executive suite. The top of the whole building. The part of the tower that smells like money instead of carpet cleaner. My supervisor radioed that the CEO was working late and the floor needed a quiet pass. Don't disturb her office. I pushed my cart down that long, silent hallway, thinking about Mia's breathing, not about the door at the end of the hall standing an inch open. I heard it before I saw it, a sharp breath, like someone in pain trying not to sound like it. Then a small metallic click, like a buckle. I should have turned around right then. I didn't. Vittoria Lang was standing in front of a full-length mirror in her private dressing room, blouse off, both hands shaking as she tried to cinch a stiff medical brace around her ribs. The overhead light was too bright for what it was showing me. Every scar caught white and exposed, no shadow to soften it. Across her back and side, faint white scarring and the yellowed edge of an old bruise caught the light. This was not a woman adjusting her clothes. This was a woman in the middle of a fight nobody else was allowed to witness. Her breath came out in short, controlled pulls, like she'd trained herself not to gasp out loud even when it hurt. She saw me in the mirror before I could back away. Her whole face changed. Not embarrassment, something colder. Calculation. Her hand froze on the strap, knuckles white. "Who are you?" she said, low and level. "And why are you in here?" I said I was so sorry, that I hadn't meant to, and then I was in the hallway, cart abandoned, heart going like a hammer, certain I'd just lost the only job standing between my daughter and a stack of medical bills. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew yet, was that there was a small security camera mounted above that dressing room door. It had been recording, quietly, for months. For reasons that had nothing to do with me, a system Vittoria's security team had installed after an earlier break-in scare, long before I ever pushed a cart down that hallway. That footage was still sitting on a private server when I drove home to East Atlanta that night and sat on the edge of Mia's bed, listening to her breathe, wondering how I was going to explain to a 7-year-old why Daddy didn't have a job anymore. Some men don't raise their voice, they just don't leave. I didn't know it yet, but that was about to be tested in a way I never saw coming. The next morning, my supervisor told me Ms. Lang wanted to see me, personally, alone. I rode the elevator up thinking about severance, unemployment, how fast I could find something else. I was not thinking about a folder sitting on her glass desk with my name already typed on it, a number beside it that made my mouth go dry. $4,200 a week, full medical for Mia included, and a single sentence typed beneath it that would change both our lives. This offer is contingent on your signature by end of day. My hand actually hovered over that paper a moment before I signed it. I thought about Mia's laugh, the real one, the one that comes out when she's not worried about anything at all. I hadn't heard enough of that laugh lately, not with the medical bills sitting on the counter. I signed it. I told myself I had no choice, and for Mia, I didn't. What I didn't understand yet was that the woman across that desk had already decided, long before I ever pushed a cart down her hallway, exactly how far she was willing to go to protect her secret, and that I had just become part of it, whether I understood the rules of the game or not. Did Spencer just save his family, or walk straight into something far more dangerous? Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The contract called me a personal, discreet handler. What it actually meant, nobody explained. I found out on the job, the way I find out most things, by paying attention. My first week in Vittoria Lang's world, on the top floor of that Buckhead Tower, was its own kind of education. She was precise, demanding, and cold in a way that felt practiced, like armor she put on with her blazer every morning. She corrected the way I opened doors. She corrected the way I stood in meetings. I told myself it didn't matter. $4,200 a week doesn't care if your boss likes you. But some nights, driving home, I caught myself wondering what had made a person build walls that thick. Nobody gets that careful about being touched, about being seen, without a reason underneath it. Some men don't raise their voice. They just don't leave. I didn't say much of anything that first week. I just kept showing up, kept my eyes down, kept doing my job. Something about that, I think, unsettled her more than if I'd asked questions. 10 days in, during a negotiation with a logistics partner from Charlotte, I watched her freeze mid-sentence at the head of the conference table, color draining from her face as her back seized. Everyone else in that room was watching their phones or their notes. I wasn't. I stepped forward with a folder of updated figures nobody had asked for, leaned in close enough to murmur that she should brace against the table, and let my hand rest flat against the small of her back. Just enough support to get her through the next 90 seconds without anyone in that room seeing what I saw. She finished the presentation without a tremor in her voice. The deal closed. Afterward, in the elevator, she didn't thank me. She just looked at me for a long moment, like she was recalculating something. "You didn't flinch," she said finally. "Wasn't my first emergency," I told her. just usually a smaller person having it. That was the first time I saw something close to a real smile cross her face. 2 days later, I took Mia to her regular appointment at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. The receptionist told me, almost in passing, that Ms. Lang's office had already called to confirm Mia's specialist schedule and ask about her inhaler prescription coverage. The same week, I'd signed my contract before I'd technically even started. I stood there a second, doing the math. That call would have gone out while she was still running a background check overnight, moving fast, the way people with real resources move fast, still deciding whether to trust a stranger who'd caught her at her most exposed. She had been quietly looking out for my daughter before she'd even looked me in the eye and offered me a job. I didn't say anything to her about it, but something in me shifted that day. That night I sat on the porch with Miss Betty, the two of us watching the streetlights flicker on, and she asked how the new job was treating me. I told her it was complicated. She just nodded like she already knew that and said, "Complicated's not always bad, baby. Sometimes it just means it matters." I thought about that longer than I probably should have. I started paying attention, not just to keep my job, but because I wanted to understand this woman who kept her guard up like a fortress wall and still, somehow, found a minute to check on a little girl's asthma medication. She started asking about Mia, too. Small questions at first. How old? What grade? Was she doing better with the wheezing? Then longer ones. I got the sense Vittoria Lang didn't have many people in her life who asked about her without wanting something back. And she wasn't sure yet what to do with someone who didn't seem to want anything either. Once, late on a Thursday, I noticed her hand rest a beat too long on the edge of a locked desk drawer before she caught herself and moved it away. Like there was something in there she didn't want found. I didn't ask. I've learned some doors open on their own time. Then Justin Lang showed up. I was in the outer office when he walked in unannounced. Tall, expensively dressed, the kind of confidence that comes from never once being told no. He didn't ask for Vittoria. He informed the receptionist he'd wait. When she finally came out to meet him, he said, loud enough for 2 board members waiting nearby to hear it clearly, "How's your health holding up, Vittoria? Board's been asking. Be a shame if that fragile back of yours became a liability the shareholders had to think about." He left before she could answer. The room went very quiet. I watched her jaw tighten, watched her set her shoulders the exact way she did right before a board presentation, like she was building the wall back up in real time, brick by brick, in front of everyone. 10 minutes later, Vittoria's assistant, rattled and not thinking straight, let slip to me that Justin had been in contact with Harold Whitfield, one of the board's senior members, for weeks. Someone inside the company was talking to him, someone close. That night, taking out the recycling near her office, I found a phone Vittoria had thrown away. Cracked screen, but still readable. One message thread from Justin, sent months earlier, still open. A threat, phrased just carefully enough to avoid sounding like one, about proof of her condition surfacing if she didn't be reasonable about signing over her remaining equity in the company. I didn't tell her I'd seen it. Not yet. But I understood, standing there in that parking garage with a dead phone in my hand, that I wasn't just protecting a woman's privacy anymore. I was standing somewhere between her and a man who had already hurt her once and clearly wasn't finished. The next morning, Vittoria called me into her office and closed the door herself, which she never did. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen on her before. Not from the back pain, from something heavier. "If you want to walk away right now," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I'll pay you 3 months severance. You and your daughter would be safe. No one would blame you." I thought about Mia. I thought about the jar of savings, about the school gymnasium and the coat that cost more than my rent, about a woman who'd quietly called a children's hospital before she'd even decided to trust me. "What do you need me to do?" I asked her. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me like she was seeing something she hadn't expected to find in that building at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. A man who wasn't leaving. Justin Lang just made his first move, and Vittoria has a decision to make that could cost Spencer everything. What is she really planning behind that closed door? Vittoria offered Spencer an easy way out. 3 months' pay, no questions, walk away clean. He said no. If you were the one standing in that office, with the daughter's medical bills on the counter at home, do you stay and risk everything, or take the money and go? Team stay or team walk away? Drop a 1 or a 2 below. She told me the whole truth that afternoon, sitting across from me in an office that suddenly felt smaller than it had a right to. 3 years earlier, at a house in Buckhead, Justin had pushed her down a staircase during a fight over her wanting a divorce. Broken ribs, a spinal injury that never fully healed. He'd arranged it to look like a car accident before anyone thought to question it. I asked her, quietly, why she'd never told the police the truth. She looked out the window a long moment before she answered. Because a woman who says her husband tried to kill her still gets asked what she did to provoke it, she said. I couldn't run a company and be that story at the same time, so I let it be an accident, and I got out the only way I could, quietly. She got her divorce. She got her freedom, on paper. What she never got was distance, because a man like Justin doesn't let go of something he still sees as his. If the board finds out I wear a brace, she said, voice steady but her hands weren't. If they see the scars, they'll say I'm too fragile to run this company. Justin knows that. He's counting on it. I didn't offer her comfort she hadn't asked for. I just asked the only question that mattered. What do you need me to do? She looked almost frightened by the question, like she wasn't used to anyone asking it and meaning it. You could still leave, she said again. I'm not leaving, I said. Some men don't raise their voice. They just don't leave. The shareholders' meeting was 2 days later, in a hall on the top floor with more money in the room than my whole neighborhood sees in a year. Fluorescent light bounced off marble, and the air conditioning hummed too loud in the silence between speakers. Justin sat front row, uninvited by anyone but himself, asking pointed questions about leadership stability that weren't really questions at all. I watched Vittoria's voice start to shake halfway through her presentation. Watched her hand grip the podium edge a beat too hard, her knuckles going pale against the dark wood. I stood up. My pulse was loud enough I could hear it in my own ears. And for half a second I thought about Mia, about what would happen to her if this went wrong, and I lost the job that was keeping her covered. I don't fully remember deciding to move past that fear. I just remember walking to the front of that room in my one good jacket, in front of men and women who'd never once looked at me twice, and saying, loud enough for every seat to hear, Ms. Lang is dealing with an old injury. I'm the person who helps her manage it. If anyone in this room wants to question her ability to lead, I'd ask you to look at 3 years of results first. And if someone's trying to use a private medical matter to take this company from her, I'd think real hard about what that says about them.
The room went dead silent. Justin's face went through about 4 different colors. Vittoria didn't say a word. She just looked at me the way you look at something you weren't sure was real. The vote went her way. The deal closed. By every measure that mattered to the people in that room, it was a win. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we could breathe. I had no idea that the hardest part of that day was still coming, in a private office with the door locked a few hours later. She pulled me into that office the second the hall cleared, and for the first time since I'd met her, Vittoria Lang cried in front of another human being.
The overhead lights were off, just the last gray daylight through the window, and the quiet hum of the buildings settling around us. There's something you don't know, she said, and her voice cracked in a way that had nothing to do with her back. 6 months ago, long before I ever met you, I built a failsafe. A story already written, ready to fill in a name, someone on my staff who'd supposedly discovered my condition and used it against me if the board ever forced my hand. I never thought I'd need a real person to put in it. Then you walked into that dressing room, and the camera above my door caught you standing there. That footage and your name were sitting in the same file by morning. I had documentation ready. I was going to sacrifice you to save the company. That was always the plan, once you became part of it. I felt that sentence land somewhere behind my ribs, worse than anything Justin had said to her in that outer office. I thought of the locked drawer I'd noticed weeks earlier, the one she'd pulled her hand back from like it burned. I understood now what had been sitting inside it. What Vittoria was really protecting wasn't the company. It was the one thing Justin's staircase had taken from her: the right to never be seen as breakable again. Her fear wasn't losing shareholders. It was losing control the way she'd lost it that night 3 years ago, powerless, on the floor. Building that file wasn't cruelty. It was the same survival instinct that had once made her call an accident instead of a crime. She wanted safety more than she wanted to be good. And in that room, watching Spencer choose her without flinching, she had to decide whether she was still that frightened woman on the stairs, or someone who could finally risk trusting one person enough to put the knife down. "But today," she went on, "when you stood up in that room without hesitating, I couldn't do it." I destroyed the file last night. All of it. I chose you over the company I built my entire life around, and I need you to understand that means something, even though I should never have had that plan at all. I didn't say anything for a long time. The silence sat between us, heavy as anything I'd ever carried. "You were ready to sacrifice me," I finally said, "and in the end, you chose me instead." She nodded, tears still on her face, no longer bothering to hide them. "Because you're the first person who ever made me believe I didn't have to be strong all by myself." We didn't tell anyone that night. Nothing about us had changed on paper, but something between us had shifted for good. I wasn't her handler anymore, not really. I was the man Vittoria Lang, the most powerful woman in that Buckhead boardroom, had chosen over her own empire. Vittoria almost sacrificed Spencer to save herself, but instead, she chose him. What happens now that the truth is finally out between them? I want to be honest with you about something. Finding out someone almost gave you up to save themselves doesn't just disappear because they cried and told you the truth. It sits with you. I drove home that night on autopilot, Atlanta traffic blurring past, replaying her words. "I was going to sacrifice you," over and over, until I pulled into my apartment complex and just sat in the old Dragon with the engine off, staring at nothing. My own father walked out on my mother when I was 9, and I remember thinking for years afterward that the people who are supposed to stay are exactly the ones who don't. I built my whole life proving that idea wrong for Mia's sake. Sitting there in that dark parking lot, I realized some part of me had been braced my whole life for someone to finally prove it right instead. What I felt in that parking lot wasn't just betrayal. It was an old wound reopening. Ever since my father left, I'd measured every person by one question: will you stay when staying costs you something? Some part of me wanted to walk back into that office and quit on the spot, just to prove I could leave before anyone left me first. But underneath that anger was a quieter truth. I didn't actually want to go. I wanted her to have chosen me without ever needing to almost lose me. That's the conflict I couldn't shake, loving someone honestly while still owing myself the truth about how much they'd been willing to risk. Mia was already asleep when I got in. Miss Betty had watched her, same as always, and she gave me a look on the porch that told me she could tell something in me was different, even if she didn't ask what. I sat by Mia's bed a long time that night, listening to her breathe, thinking about a woman 30 minutes away who had a plan to destroy me sitting ready in a file for 6 months. And thinking, too, about the moment she chose to burn that file instead. Both things were true. That's what I had to sit with. She had been willing to let me fall. She had also chosen not to, at real cost to herself, the first real cost I'd seen her pay for anyone. I didn't go back to work angry the next day. I went back quiet, watching her differently. Not with suspicion exactly, but with a kind of clear-eyed honesty I hadn't let myself have before. I think she felt it. She was gentler with me that week, and less sure of herself than I'd ever seen her. Like she understood she'd have to earn something back that she couldn't just buy or command. It was a Thursday evening, both of us still in the office long after everyone else had gone, when she finally asked me straight out, "Do you regret staying?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because she deserved an honest answer, not a comforting one. "No," I said, "but I won't pretend what you told me didn't hurt. It did. You were ready to let me lose everything to protect what you built. I understand why. I'm not sure I blame you for being that scared after what Justin did to you. But I need you to know I heard it, and I'm not going to unhear it just because you changed your mind at the last minute." She nodded slowly, and to her credit, she didn't argue or explain it away. "That's fair," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to just move past it. I just needed you to know the whole truth, even the ugly part, especially the ugly part." That honesty, more than the boardroom, more than the tears, is what actually started to rebuild something between us. Not a fairy tale. Something steadier. Two people who'd seen each other at their worst and were choosing, carefully, to keep showing up anyway. He didn't leave. But this time, he made sure she understood exactly what staying had cost him. I hadn't left, but I'd also stopped pretending everything was fine. And I think that mattered more to her than if I'd simply forgiven her on the spot. Justin didn't disappear quietly. Word came through the board a few days later that he'd tried one last angle, reaching out directly to major shareholders with vague insinuations about Vittoria's instability, hoping to force an emergency vote before anyone could verify a single claim. It didn't work. The board members who'd watched me stand up in that hall, who'd watched 3 years of strong numbers speak louder than gossip, weren't interested in a disgruntled ex-husband's insinuations. Harold Whitfield, the board member Justin had been quietly courting, was formally censured for entertaining outside interference in the company's leadership. Justin's credibility, built for years on charm and intimidation, cracked in front of the very people he'd been counting on. I watched Vittoria field that entire mess with a steadiness I hadn't seen from her before. Not the brittle control of someone terrified of being exposed, but something calmer. She wasn't hiding anymore, not from the board, and, slowly, carefully, not from me either. One evening, after the dust from Justin's failed play had settled, she sat across from me in her office, the city lights of Buckhead spread out behind her, and said something I didn't expect. "I've spent my whole adult life believing that if anyone saw me as breakable, I'd lose everything. You saw me at the most broken I've ever let anyone see me, and instead of using it, you protected it. Then I almost betrayed that, and you stayed anyway, and told me the truth about how much it hurt instead of pretending it didn't." She paused. "I don't know how to be the kind of person who deserves that, but I'd like to learn." I didn't have a smooth answer for that. I just said, "Then let's find out together." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't supposed to be. It was two people, exhausted and honest, finally on the same side of something. Justin's last attack has failed. But can Spencer and Vittoria really build something real after everything that's happened between them? The next chapter changes both their lives for good. 2 weeks after the shareholders' meeting, I was promoted, officially this time, on paper, no NDA fine print attached, to Special Projects Coordinator. My own office, 3 floors down from Vittoria's, small but mine, with the window that looked out over the Buckhead skyline, instead of a hallway I used to push a cleaning cart down. Mia got enrolled in an expanded asthma management program at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the kind of specialized care that used to feel like a number I'd never reach on a jar full of savings. Vittoria still had bad days. Atlanta's weather turns on a dime in the fall. And when the pressure dropped, so did her guard on the pain. But she stopped hiding it from me entirely. Some evenings,
in her penthouse after a long week, I'd help her unfasten the brace she'd worn all day. And instead of rushing to cover the scars, she'd just sit by the window with me afterward, talking about nothing important. Her mother's garden growing up in Savannah, my mother's old recipe for banana pudding, the ridiculous things Mia said about jelly sandwiches. Small, ordinary conversations.
I think, for her, ordinary was the whole point. Nobody had let her be ordinary in a very long time. Life at home kept its shape too, in the ways that mattered most. I fixed the porch swing that had been creaking since spring, finally got around to it on a Saturday, with Mia handing me the wrong-sized screws on purpose, just to make me laugh. She still helps me bake the simple sugar cookies for her school's bake sale every fall, standing on a kitchen chair, flour on her nose, telling me exactly how many sprinkles is the right amount. Some things about being her father hadn't changed, and I was grateful every single day that they didn't have to. One Sunday, I took Mia to Piedmont Park, kite flying, a hot dog cart, the usual. Vittoria showed up without much warning, in jeans instead of a blazer for maybe the first time since I'd known her, carrying a small gift bag for Mia and 2 VIP passes to the Botanical Gardens butterfly exhibit. Mia ran straight at her and wrapped both arms around her waist before I could even say hello. "Thank you, Miss Vittoria." Vittoria knelt down to Mia's height, and for a second, all that careful control just melted off her face. She looked, for once, like someone who wasn't managing anything, just glad to be exactly where she was. Later, sitting on a park bench while Mia chased a kite across the grass, the late afternoon light turning everything gold, Mia turned to me and said, matter of fact, the way only a 7-year-old can be, "Cousin Vittoria sent me a present before you even worked for her, Daddy. The lady at the hospital told me." I looked over at Vittoria. She didn't deny it. She just gave me a small, almost shy smile. And I understood something in that moment that I'd only half suspected before. She'd been quietly looking out for my daughter and me from the very beginning, back when she was still deciding whether to trust me, back when she still had a file sitting ready to use me if she needed to. Both those things had lived in her at once. I was starting to understand that people usually aren't just one thing. The company steadied. Justin's name stopped coming up in meetings altogether. He'd finally understood, the way men like him eventually do when the leverage runs out, that there was nothing left to threaten Vittoria with. She led that company from a place of strength that had nothing to do with hiding what had happened to her. I still worked long hours. I still drove the old Dragon, though Mia had started lobbying hard for a car that doesn't sound like it's dying. Some things about my life hadn't changed at all, but something underneath all of it had shifted for good. The fear that being seen clearly would cost me everything had loosened its grip on both of us, a little more each week. They finally have a moment of peace, but is it enough to build something lasting after everything they've survived? The final chapter is where it all comes together. 3 months after that night in the dressing room, the merger Justin had tried so hard to derail closed successfully. He was formally removed from any advisory position connected to the board. Quietly, the way these things usually end, with lawyers instead of headlines. Vittoria remained exactly where she'd always belonged, at the head of that company, stronger for having survived him instead of hidden from him. She and I still hadn't made anything public. There was no announcement, no press release for something that private. But most evenings, once the building emptied out, I found myself back up on that top floor anyway. Not pushing a cart this time, just sitting across from her while she worked, the city lights doing what they do over Buckhead at night. One of those evenings, she looked up from her laptop and asked me something she'd never asked directly before. "Do you ever regret walking into that dressing room? Seeing what you saw?" I thought about it, really thought, the way she deserved. I thought about that first morning, 5:40 a.m., peanut butter and no jelly, a jar of savings that never felt like enough. I thought about a promise I made a scared little girl in an ER hallway 3 years back, and how everything since had just been me trying to keep it. No, I told her, because if I hadn't, I never would have known that the strongest woman I ever met needed somebody standing behind her too. And I never would have known that you almost gave me up to protect yourself, and then chose not to. That matters more to me than if none of it had ever happened at all. She leaned her head against my shoulder, quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for seeing me," she said finally. "And thank you for letting me be brave enough to be weak when it mattered." That Sunday, I drove Mia and Vittoria to a little ice cream stand near Piedmont Park. The three of us packed into the old Dragon, Mia in the middle seat giggling about something only 7-year-olds find that funny. Vittoria reached over and took my hand on the wheel, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the city didn't feel cold to me anymore. This story reminds us that real strength was never about hiding what's broken. It's about finally letting someone else hold part of the weight, even after life taught you not to trust anyone with it. If you're a widow who still keeps his reading glasses on the nightstand exactly where he left them, that's not something to apologize for. But maybe this week, try one more thing too. Invite the neighbor who's been quietly leaving tomatoes on your porch in for real coffee, not just a doorstep hello. And let them stay long enough to hear one real story about him. If you're a grandfather who feels like your family only sees you as the guy who fixes the gutters, let your granddaughter catch you tearing up at her school recital instead of turning away. She needs to know that steady men feel things all the way through, not just fix things quietly and say nothing. And if you're carrying an old hurt nobody in your family has ever heard, pick one person this month, just one, and tell them over a slow Sunday dinner, real napkins instead of paper towels. Vittoria Lang had every reason left to trust no one again. Spencer Reed had every reason to walk away the moment it got hard. Neither of them did. If there's someone steady and quiet in your life who's never once asked for anything back, this might be the week you finally tell them what that's meant to you. Written from a human heart with AI's support, this story only hopes to send you a warm message. Kindness is never wasted, and even when the world feels harsh, there is always the light of justice and beautiful things quietly returning to those who are kind.